Welcome back to the Deep Dive, listeners. Today we're doing things a little differently. We're diving into the mysteries of JFK's assassination, but through the lens of the men who killed Kennedy.
Ah, yes, this documentary. It's definitely stirred the pot over the years, challenging the official narrative and presenting a different take on what happened that day in Dallas.
We've got excerpts from the transcript right here, and we're ready to unpack it all, the key evidence, the main arguments. But before we do, I think it's important to say this documentary offers just one perspective on what happened.
Right. Definitely approach this with, a critical eye. There are so many different viewpoints on this tragic and complex event.
Okay, so let's start with the most famous piece of evidence, the Zapruder film. It feels like the documentary really leans on this footage, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. That home movie, the one capturing the assassination, the documentary uses it to go right at that lone gunman idea. They have Robert Groden, a photo analyst. He points out how JFK's head snaps back, but like violently. You wouldn't see that with a shot from behind.
Yeah, it's compelling. It's hard to shake that image. And it definitely plays into the conspiracy theories about a second shooter from the grassy knoll. But wouldn't a shot from the front be even more difficult?
Oh,
With the crowds and the moving car.
that's a good point. And the documentary tries to address it head on. They argue that a skilled shooter, especially one with a clear shot, could have made it. They also have those eyewitness accounts. People saying they saw JFK's head, and I'm quoting here, blown off from the back, supporting that idea of a shot from the front.
Right, so that's one piece of the puzzle. But the documentary goes on to question the medical evidence, too.
Right,
The difference between what the doctors actually saw versus what ended up in the official reports.
exactly. They compare what the Parkland Hospital doctors observed with the official autopsy report. And there are these big differences, especially in how they describe that fatal head wound.
Yeah, and one of the most, truly shocking details comes from Dr. Robert McClelland, one of those Parkland doctors. He states that there was, quote, no brain to be removed during the autopsy.
Yeah. And it clashes with the official report, doesn't it? Their analysis of the bullet's path through the brain. And to make things even more suspicious, they point out that JFK's brain, it's missing, gone from the National Archives.
Okay, so we've got the Zapruder film, we've got conflicting medical evidence, and then there's the Warren Commission's single bullet theory. For our listeners who might not remember, what is that theory?
Right, so the Warren Commission claimed that only 2 bullets hit JFK. And one of those bullets, it went on to hit Governor Connolly. He was in the same car. Basically, one bullet caused all those wounds.
And the documentary argues that this is impossible.
They challenge it for sure. They bring up James Tague, this eyewitness. He was actually injured by a stray bullet. And then there's evidence of a bullet mark on a curb nearby. Suggests more shots were fired. They also question the physics, the timing. How could one bullet do all that?
And I always get stuck on that detail about the FBI dismissing the curb mark. They said it was, quote, eradicated by street sweepers. A little too convenient, isn't it?
It does seem that way. And that leads us to the infamous grassy knoll.
Oh, yeah. The grassy knoll. Conspiracy theories galore. What does the documentary have to say about it?
Well, they focus on the badge man, this mysterious figure. Spotted in a photo taken by a bystander, Mary Mormon. The documentary argues this figure, he seems to be wearing a police uniform, is proof of a second shooter, positioned on the grassy knoll.
So they use Badgeman to back up what witness Gordon Arnold said.
Yeah.
Right. He claimed to see someone there on the grassy knoll before the shooting happened.
Yeah. And what makes Arnold's story interesting is that he talked about this years before anyone even analyzed that Mormon photo. Adds a layer of, credibility. Maybe he wasn't just latching onto later conspiracy theories.
So we're seeing a pattern here. Ballistics that don't quite add up, medical evidence that's inconsistent, and a potential second shooter. And then there's the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit just after the assassination.
The documentary digs into this too. They highlight those conflicting accounts of what the attacker looked like and the different reports of where it happened, all casting doubt on Oswald's involvement.
And they bring up that detail about the conflicting reports on whether Tippit's killer walked east or west on 10th Street, something the Warren Commission seems to have just glanced over.
It's those little details, the ones that don't quite fit, that really fuel the alternative theories in The Men Who Killed Kennedy. And from there, they go even further, saying Oswald might have been framed for the whole thing.
Framed, like someone set him up to take the fall.
Right. They introduce this concept of sheep dipping. You create a fake identity in history for someone to frame them. They talk about Oswald's connections to guys like Guy Bannister and David Ferrie, saying he might have been involved with those anti-Castro operations, and that ultimately he was turned into a patsy.
They talk about how Oswald had access to training films and military equipment in Bannister's building, suggesting he was involved in these covert operations. It's a wild theory, but they lay it out in a way that makes you think, maybe.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The documentary goes on to examine Lyndon B. Johnson, who became president after Kennedy's death, and they don't hold back on their questions about his motives.
They go deep into LBJ's political ambitions, his past scandals, like the Box 13 vote rigging. Can you remind our listeners about that one?
Sure, Box 13 refers to that incident where people allegedly stuffed ballot boxes to make sure LBJ won that 1948 Texas Senate election. It's a good example of the kind of political maneuvering and possible corruption they link to LBJ.
And they even allege that LBJ might have had something to do with the murder of Henry Marshall, this Texas official who was looking into LBJ's corrupt dealings. I mean, those are some heavy accusations.
Yeah, the documentary is bold, for sure, and it doesn't end there. They talk about a massive cover-up, saying evidence was suppressed, autopsy photos were manipulated, key pieces like the limo windshield just poof, vanished.
We talked about that windshield earlier. The documentary mentions how some witnesses saw a bullet hole in it, maybe indicating a shot from the front. But it disappeared.
Right, and they interview Paul O'Connor, a medical technician who helped with the autopsy. He claims that he was threatened, told he would face court-martial if he said anything about the procedure.
That's a bit unsettling. Someone threatening a medical professional to stay quiet. Makes you think there were people who wanted to control the story around the assassination.
That's the big takeaway from the men who killed Kennedy. They want you to question what you've been told, to consider the possibility that there's more to this than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. We've covered a lot of ground. There's a Zapruder film, LBJ's potential role, but we're just getting started.
Right, we've got to dig deeper into those claims, examine the evidence, see if there are other explanations for the inconsistencies that the documentary pointed out.
And that's exactly what we'll do in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned because we've got a lot more to unravel. So we've been unpacking some of those claims in The Men Who Killed Kennedy, and one of the most, shocking ones is that Lee Harvey Oswald maybe didn't fire any shots at all that day.
Yeah. It's a big claim, isn't it? And the documentary builds it up by challenging, the timeline. Could Oswald have actually pulled off what the Warren Commission said?
Let's remind everyone the Warren Commission decided that Oswald acted alone. 3 shots. 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Less than 7 seconds. That's a pretty good shooting.
And that's what the documentary's getting at. They bring in these expert marksmen. They say it's basically impossible to be that accurate, that fast, with the rifle Oswald supposedly used.
But they don't just use those opinions, right? They have eyewitnesses, too. People who contradict the official story.
Exactly. Testimonies from people who say they saw or heard things that just don't fit. If Oswald was the only shooter up in that book depository.
Like Bill and Gail Newman. They were standing near the limo. They described seeing JFK's head explode from the back. But if the shots all came from behind, how does that make sense?
Yeah, it doesn't. And their story, along with a bunch of others, throws shade on that Warren Commission conclusion that all those shots came from the book depository. And then there's Senator Ralph Yarborough. He was just 2 cars behind the president.
And he thought right away that the shots came from the grassy knoll and the railroad overpass. Pretty significant coming from someone who was actually there in the motorcade.
Right. The documentary uses all of that, those eyewitness accounts, the analysis of the rifle, even that badgeman figure we talked about to say, look, Oswald couldn't have done this alone.
They really pick apart the official story, finding those inconsistencies, raising questions left and right. And they do the same thing when they talk about the cover-up. We mentioned that missing windshield.
Oh, yeah. They talk about how so many people saw that bullet hole in the windshield. A shot from the front, maybe. But the windshield, gone.
And then there's Paul O'Connor. He said he was threatened to keep quiet about what he knew about the autopsy.
It's all those details. If they're true, someone was trying to hide the evidence, shut people up, make sure the story they wanted out there was the only story.
Like a web of lies, almost.
Yeah.
Meant to hide what really happened to JFK.
It's a powerful image, and it gets to the heart of what the documentary is trying to do. They want people to think critically about the assassination. Don't just accept what you've been told.
So, We've mostly focused on how the documentary critiques the official narrative, but they go into some alternative theories too, right?
Yeah. Exploring why certain people or groups might have wanted Kennedy dead. We're talking organized crime, political rivals, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds like we're about to head down a rabbit hole. But before we do, gotta remember to be skeptical, right?
Oh, absolutely. Look at the evidence. See if there are other explanations. Acknowledge that we don't know everything. It's easy to get swept up in those conspiracy theories, but we've got to stay grounded in the facts. Logic.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's hear about those theories. The documentary looks at Lyndon B. Johnson's possible involvement quite a bit, doesn't it?
They do. They point to his ambitions, his history with scandals, like that Box 13 thing, and his supposed connections to people in organized crime.
And they even suggest the link between LBJ and Henry Marshall's murder. That Texas official who was looking into LBJ's dealings. That's a big accusation.
It is. Now, the documentary doesn't outright say LBJ was involved in the assassination, but they do raise some good questions. What did he have to gain? Could he have benefited from Kennedy's death?
They keep asking,
No.
cui bono?
Right.
Who benefits? And LBJ becoming president right after? Well, it's hard to ignore.
And then there's the CIA. The documentary talks about their covert operations, regime change, how their interests might have clashed with Kennedy's foreign policy.
Kennedy pulling out of Vietnam. That must have angered some people in the CIA, right? They thought that war was important. And then there's the Bay of Pigs, a big embarrassment for the Kennedy administration.
Right. And the documentary suggests that maybe the CIA felt betrayed by Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs.
It's a theory a lot of researchers have explored. No solid evidence saying the CIA was involved in the assassination. But their track record, those potential motives, makes you think.
And we can't forget about organized crime, the mafia. Another group the documentary looks at.
Right, the mafia was furious with Kennedy for cracking down on them, especially in Cuba. They lost all those gambling interests after Castro came to power. Motive and means, right?
And the documentary also considers anti-Castro Cuban exiles. Maybe they wanted Kennedy gone, felt like he abandoned them after the Bay of Pigs. You know, they wanted to overthrow Castro.
So many players. LBJ, the CIA, the mafia, Cuban exiles. It's like this tangled web of motives. And the documentary, they're not afraid to go there, to that dark side of American politics.
Right. They show us how those powerful forces, maybe they conspired against the president. And it's a lot to process. Remember, these are just theories. The documentary isn't saying they have all the answers.
No, but they lay out all these possibilities.
Yeah.
They want us to think for ourselves, question that official story. They're almost saying, here's what we found, now what do you believe?
Exactly. That's what makes The Men Who Killed Kennedy so interesting. It's not just about the assassination. It makes you think about history, about corruption, about our need to find out the truth.
So we've gone through how they analyze the assassination itself. We've looked at those alternate theories, but there's more. They also step back, look at what a cover-up would mean. What are the implications? And that's what we'll talk about next. So we've really dug into the men who killed Kennedy, haven't we? Looked at their evidence, those alternative theories, but it goes further, doesn't it? That idea of a cover-up and what it would mean.
Right, and that's where it gets really, heavy. It's not just about who pulled the trigger. It's about our system, American democracy, that trust between people and the government. What happens to that?
They argue that if something buried the truth about JFK, that's a huge betrayal.
Yeah, it would say that someone, maybe in the government, maybe not, they chose their own interests over the truth, over justice.
It makes you think, right? Are there people, groups above the law? Can they just twist things, hide information to get what they want?
And what does that do to us, to society? When you can't even trust what you're told about something this big, this important.
Chilling, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think that the truth about JFK, about that day, might be hidden on purpose.
And the documentary doesn't stop there. It's not just about the assassination. It's about power, unchecked power.
Right.
About holding those in charge accountable.
And the media, right. How they shape what we think, how information can be, well, manipulated or disappear.
They suggest that the media, maybe they were in on it. Maybe they were just careless. But they might have helped that lone gunman's story stick and kept other ideas from seeing the light of day.
Makes you think about the role of journalists. They need to really dig into things, report on those tough topics, especially when powerful people want to control the narrative.
And for us, we have to be smart about what we see, what we read, who's saying it, what's their agenda.
It's fascinating. They look at what happened after the assassination, And it's as compelling as the event itself. You see the impact it's had on America.
Yeah, that loss of trust, all those conspiracy theories, it's like a ripple effect. We're still dealing with it. It shapes how we think about power, about politics, and the search for the truth.
We need to be transparent,
Mhm.
accountable, and never stop looking for the truth, even when it's hard, even when someone's trying to stop you.
The men who killed Kennedy, it's not just about an assassination, it's about democracy, how fragile it is, about those dangers of power, and it's about us, our need to find out what really happened.
So we've reached the end of our deep dive. What are your final thoughts?
It's a powerful film. Sure, people debate it, but it makes you think. Don't just take things at face value. Keep asking questions, especially with big events, moments that change history.
It's a reminder. Engage with history. Don't just assume things. And remember, the past. It's rarely simple.
They might not give us all the answers, but they leave us with those questions, make you want to learn more. And that responsibility to seek the truth wherever it leads.
That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for being with us on this journey into the mysteries of JFK's assassination. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.